Students make progress in two completely different ways. Science and RE student teachers on articulation of purpose and experiences of university preparation for science-religion encounters. Dr. Mary Woolley from NISA, Canterbury Christ Church University. This paper reports on one slice of a large-scale mixed methods research project exploring the beginning teacher and the science-religion encounter in the classroom. Caroline Thomas, Bob Bowie and I have worked together on this part of the project, with Sabina Hubert designing the questionnaire and online survey. Caroline and Bob are also presenting about this project today. There are 3 sub-projects within this overall large-scale project. This paper emerges from the second, exploring how we can understand the experience of beginning teachers as to how knowledge works in science-religion encounters and how this impacts confidence and competence of those individual beginning teachers. Theos research by Nick Spencer sought to collate existing research into public attitudes to science and religion in the UK since 2009. The report concluded that very little research has been done that explores what people actually think about their own or others' views on the relationship between science and religion. We wanted to explore how beginning teachers negotiate that relationship. There have been several attempts to create a typology of possible relationships between the two disciplines. For example, that by Barbour, conflict, independence, dialogue and integration as different ways that the relationship between science and religion can be perceived. Various authors have explored science and religion in schools, but usually through the lens of pupils' experiences. For example, the work of Barry Billingsley with the Epistemic Insight Project. There is a tendency for the literature that does focus on student teachers to look at evolution and attitudes towards teaching evolution rather than a broad range of science and religion encounters that we hope to look at within this project. So this sub-project took a mixed methods research approach with focus groups carried out with students across 6 different universities, followed by an online survey aiming to recruit over 1,000 beginning teachers from across the country, which is now live. This paper focuses on one small slice of the focus group data and just the 10 secondary focus groups with secondary school student teachers. What student teachers reported to be the purpose of their own subject, of the other subject, and a particular cross-subject university session that they experienced. So we carried out the focus groups over the last 18 months, and while we started with them being face-to-face, we were quickly forced to make them online, but we didn't feel that this really changed the experience. However, it did mean perhaps that it was a little more difficult to recruit students than if we had just turned up at the universities. So the students we spoke to, the secondary students, are from PGC RE courses, PGC science courses, and also an undergraduate RE course. It was a semi-structured protocol that we used in the focus groups. We explored their current teaching and educational experience, what they believed was the purpose of RE and the purpose of science education, their experience, if any, of science and religion encounters in the classroom thus far, whether taught or experienced or observed or unplanned, and any confidence or constraint issues in teaching science and religion encounters. We also asked them about their support systems. I think it's particularly important to think about how subject purpose is articulated. I believe that a teacher at any stage of their career has to do this regularly, whether it's about convincing pupils to select that subject to GCSE, talking to their parents, talking to the head teacher about why you might need more curriculum time or more subject resource, but it's also about how you make the pedagogical decisions that you make every day, because it's within this framework of purpose that you understand the subject to be about. So let's have a look at what the teachers said. For RE teachers, talked about the purpose of RE. We found that there was a very, very wide range of responses and no kind of singular story really about what they were saying, which reflects actually some of the literature on how the purpose of RE has changed in some ways over the years. The majority of responses did seem to emphasise knowledge of religions. But there was also a focus on knowledge about lived experience of religion, about belief and faith. Other responses talked about self-discovery for students and RE as a way of broadening horizons. Many of the student RE teachers were keen to talk about giving tools for intellectual inquiry. If we compare that then to what science teachers said on the purpose of RE, again, there were a range of answers. For one or two science teachers, there seemed to be a complete misconception of what happens in RE lessons. If we just look at this first quote here, I just think it sort of teaches them the same thing from a different mindset. So, for example, last week I taught about how the solar system was created, and a religious aspect might disagree with it, but also comment that God made the earth, the solar system, and so on. This student teacher seems to think that RE will always promote a religious view, and therefore disagree with science, but she seems to say that she's okay with that. Another teacher talked about the fundamental values of tolerance. In fact, several of the science teachers did, although interestingly, the word tolerance wasn't used by any of the RE teachers in talking about the purpose of the subject. I think it's really important for those for teaching those kind like key fundamental values like tolerance, being able to listen to others, being able to make appropriate debate kind of thing about different concepts and ideas. And the second example supports with that and admits that this is about when they were at school. I wonder whether that is an issue here and when teachers are expected to actually develop their understanding of what is happening in other subjects now. Are you expected to do that as a student teacher, as an NQT, as a middle manager, or can you wait till you're a senior leader and you're suddenly responsible for that subject? The science teachers didn't actually mention religions at all or finding out about religions in their comments on what happens in RE, even though the majority of the RE teachers said that's what the subject is about. But also they didn't seem to pick up on any purpose of RE that actually intersected with their own teaching, e.g. the more philosophical side that exists in many RE lessons, or for example different arguments for the creation of the universe. There was a sense that more knowledge of RE from a student science teacher led to a better comparison of the two subjects. This quote at the top, I actually studied religion up until university level, and even from my own experience as a student and even seeing it these days in science lessons, it's very much like facts and laws, and we try to build up a foundation on these scientific laws, and it's very much like set in stone, that is this and that's the rule. In religion lessons, from what I've seen, it's very much a question is posed and there's a freedom in which ideas are readily shared and people have a discussion and there's an argument for and an argument against, if you get me, in classes. And it's quite interesting to see that students, they still make progress, but in two completely different ways. One is set in stone while the other is creatively making an argument. Well, this quote makes me think for several reasons. One, I think there's still a misunderstanding of contemporary RE here, where perhaps unfortunately there is a great deal of learning facts and laws about religion, religious belief and religious practice, perhaps especially at GCSE level. You could say that the science teacher thinks the grass is always greener in the RE classroom. However, at the same time, I think he's underestimating the powerful knowledge, to use Michael Young's term, that actually exists in the RE classroom by suggesting it's all just about making arguments and having your own opinions. Surely there is room for a second point, is that surely there is a room for a need for argument within science, and that's not something that could exist totally in the RE department. But I then wonder, is argumentation defined in different ways? Is it possible that teachers of these subjects could be learning something from one another? And if they did so, would they enhance the pupil experience? Not in some cheap and cheerful cross-curricular way, but in a deep, careful and rigorous interdisciplinary approach to science-religion encounters. For me, the second quote here supports that idea. He says, in the science classrooms I've been part of, it's much more a case of sort of providing knowledge and less questioning. Not that there isn't questioning, but it's just providing the base facts and theories and information that they need to essentially pass these exams. And there are lessons in between where you try and get them to feel. Most of the practicals actually in the lower year groups are about developing a bit of a sense of wonder. Science is cool, Things can happen, life, But it's mainly about providing knowledge. And the one lesson that I kind of stepped into for RE is very much more of a what do you think as the core component of gaining knowledge? What do you think? When I say this thing about Janes or Shakes, how does that make you feel about what you believe? I see this as playing down knowledge in the RE classroom. The student science teacher seems to suggest that it's all about opinions. Secondly, there is something rather misplaced about getting them to feel and develop a bit of a sense of wonder as science things rather than anything to do with RE when someone is asking you about science-religion encounters. When we come to looking at science teachers talking about the purpose of science, unlike RE, there was a unified tone to responses. Although some may say it was rather generic. This term, how the world works, was used by most of the science student teachers we talked to. This was explained then in practical terms, and different people said different things, whether it's understanding how the body works, how the earth was formed, or how certain things work, like plugs. A minority of the student science teachers gave more ambitious, perhaps more philosophical approaches to the purpose of science. Again, providing a foundation for wonder in science, explaining the limitations of the world around us, that we don't know everything. They were also keen to talk about the more pragmatic skills, problem solving and critical thinking, which linked to the intellectual inquiry you could argue that RE teachers said was the purpose of RE. I'm not arguing here that there's not something unique about each subject. I'm not arguing for any sort of integration between the two, but I just think there seemed to be a complete lack of awareness of where there might be links between these subjects, and there are clearly links in the two sets of teachers often coming across the same topics. When RE teachers, and there were more RE teachers in these focus groups than science teachers, which perhaps says something in itself, when they came to talk about the purpose of science, it was clear that the strong scientific purpose, this idea of how the world works, had filtered through to the RE teaching community, although it didn't work vice versa. Perhaps this says something about the power of the core subjects in the school education community. Some RE teachers said they didn't feel it was appropriate for them to comment on the purpose of science as they had only studied the subject to A-level. It was clear, however, that a few knowledgeable RE teachers, perhaps with a philosophy background, were able to give a more sophisticated response about the nature and purpose of science than the science teachers themselves. For example, the first one here, I think that there is a similarity between the course of inquiry between science and religion. What I mean by that is it is a search for truth. So it's a search for understanding the world that we're a part of. I think the main difference is within what parameters are you searching for the truth. So I think the parameters for philosophy are broader because you're questioning the frameworks of reality as opposed to accepting certain frameworks, such as theory through observation in science. And a second teacher, a student RE teacher, as crucial as RE is to develop people in terms of critical thinking, I think science is absolutely essential in helping children understand the world around them. And she goes on to talk about global warming and then saying you can decipher through science what is misinformation and what isn't in the modern era, which is obviously very helpful, although she doesn't put it in that terms when she's talking about RE. And there's no reason why religious education couldn't also help you decipher misinformation. One university in our selection of 6 ran a specific joint session for PGCE science and RE students. We interviewed PGCE students there across the 2 subjects and the 2 different cohorts from different years. Students were unanimous that this day was a really important session. It was set up as group work throughout the day, and one thing the students commented on was the imbalance in numbers. Some groups had 4 science teachers to 1 RE teacher. Groups were given a topic or a controversial issue and tasked to write a lesson plan. One issue raised by the RE students in talking about the session is that the science teachers couldn't see the point of incorporating any talk of religion into their lessons. The science teachers struggled to see the purpose or the role of incorporating religion into their teaching strategy. I mean, that could be really off the mark, but just from the group I was with, that seemed to be the case. Another student agreed. It was the same for my group. I feel like they seemed a lot more set in their views in the science bit than like we were. And I feel like we saw the benefits of bringing their subjects into ours rather than them bringing ours into theirs. They didn't really seem to have a lot of knowledge about ethics at all. There are difficulties here, possibly that the science curriculum is less flexible. A national curriculum subject, compulsory GCSE in most schools, it's high stakes. We could argue that there's less room for experimentation. RE, however, is a locally agreed syllabus rather than a national curriculum. It can be a lower stakes subject in non-faith schools with many students not studying it beyond 13 or 14, and even before that there might be limited curriculum time. It might occasion more time for bringing in other views, however, and parts of the RE curriculum are highly likely to have science at the centre. For them, bringing science into the classroom can't really be avoided. One student said the group she was in were actually quite the opposite. They very much wanted to talk to me about religion and how they thought it was really important as part of science. So we got set the activity and we didn't really do it because we ended up just talking about religion and science for the whole time. But they were asking me loads of questions and they were saying how they think it's important that the two crossed over. The science teachers agreed with the RE teachers that it was an important session, but perhaps didn't approach it in quite the same open-minded way. The first student we have here says the RE student was she said she was religious and had come from a religious family. However, she had quite a lot of scientific views. So she spoke about how, in her opinion, different scientific views could interlink with some things in RE. So she said she was open-minded to different outcomes, which was fantastic. Now I heard that and I read it back and I think, what is fantastic here? That she's not too religious, that she can agree with him, and we question what approach some of these science teachers were going into the session with, although they spoke positively about it. The second science teacher, for me, I don't think it would change my view personally, because my view would be particularly kind of like the science and what I've seen. And here this is beginning to get into their epistemology. I know about knowledge in science because I have seen it happen. I can see evidence for it. And maybe a lack of awareness of what the epistemology might be for an RE teacher or in a different discipline. And then there was a particular science teacher who spoke about his own religious practice. And he said he was personally very wary of challenging someone else's beliefs on a really fundamental level. Obviously, it was partially that it was what it was there for, and partially to understand how they teach and how we teach and bring it all together. But it was quite nerve-wracking. There's an awful lot of tension and interest in the room. All the students thought it was a really important session, but I wonder how far the tutors, who we're going to interview but we haven't interviewed yet, understood the amount of kind of mind-changing stuff that was going on in that room. So I come to some tentative conclusions here. I think it's clear to me that if we want to teach science and religion encounters, and I think this is a fascinating topic, it's much talked about out there, there are BBC documentaries about this, it should be there in the classroom, but we need opportunities for dialogue between subject teachers at secondary level, and I think those dialogues need to start in initial teacher education. Beginning teachers want to understand what other teachers are teaching, when they're teaching certain topics, how and why they're teaching them. And the dialogue can help to support that. But other parts of our interviews showed that was occasional. Sometimes it happened and it was luck, whether you happened to speak to the right science teacher or the right RE teacher, rather than it being a matter of process that you would find out what's happening in other departments. I believe that interdisciplinary work starts with an understanding of purpose and perhaps also an understanding of epistemology. Beginning teachers need to be able to clearly articulate their purpose, and obviously that's not just for interdisciplinary work. And I think that can be particularly difficult in a subject like RE, where purpose has been contested and purpose has changed, and there's no statement of set purpose, for example, in a national curriculum. And then finally, developing an understanding of other subjects leads to respect for other subjects. And I think that's essential for pupils to see that from their teachers. Subjects like RE, but also subjects like music, have given minimal time quite often on the curriculum. And if you hear other teachers being suspicious of those subjects, then how can that lead to pupils to wanting to get the powerful knowledge about religions or about philosophy that they might be exposed to in an RE lesson? I've put various different discussion points here to lead our discussion at TEAN today, and we can talk through those together. And I've also put details of the survey, which is live until the end of March. I would be really grateful for anybody who can convince their student teachers to take part in this survey. I'm so aware that they're in school and schools are under a lot of pressure at the moment. But if you think your students would complete that now or later on, then this is the link here, tinyurl.com/NICER survey. Or if you want more details, my email is there. Thank you very much for listening.